You think you know someone. You build a life with them. You trust them with your everything. But sometimes the person sleeping next to you is living a complete lie. My name is Mark, and I learned that truth in the most brutal way possible. Please stay with me as I tell you my story, and don't forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. For 10 years, I believed I had the perfect life. Chloe and I had built a comfortable home, shared dreams, and countless memories. We weren't rich, but we were happy, or at least I thought we were. When she got promoted at work, I was proud of her. She worked under her boss, Derek, a charismatic man who seemed to inspire everyone around him. I supported her late nights, even encouraged her to chase her ambitions. I trusted her completely, and trust was the foundation of everything we had. But cracks have a way of showing themselves when you least expect them. At first, it was small things. A new perfume she'd never worn before, her phone always flipped face down, a distant look in her eyes when she thought I wasn't watching. I tried to convince myself it was just stress from work, maybe pressure from her new role. Love has a way of making you blind to the obvious. The real test came on our anniversary. I had planned everything, cooked her favorite dinner, bought the wine she loved, and even arranged flowers on the table. It was supposed to be our night, a reminder of who we were together. But just as I was setting everything up, she called. Her voice was apologetic but distant. "I'm so sorry, Mark. Something urgent came up at work. Derek needs me to stay late. Rain check, okay?" My heart sank, but I forced a smile she couldn't even see through the phone. I told her it was fine, that I understood. But deep down, something twisted inside me. I stared at the dinner table for a long time before I made my decision. I packed the meal into containers, placed it neatly in a bag, and got in my car. If she was really stuck at work, I would surprise her. Maybe it would even make her night better. At least, that's what I told myself. But truthfully, it was my gut that drove me there, a voice in my head I could no longer ignore. The building was quiet when I pulled up, most of the windows dark. But then I saw it, the corner office on the 5th floor, the only one still lit. Derek's office. My chest tightened, my palms sweaty against the steering wheel. I parked across the street, dinner cooling in my lap as I stared at that glowing window. 2 silhouettes moved inside. My stomach dropped. Slowly, I raised my phone and zoomed in. And then I saw it clearly, Chloe leaning against Derek's desk, laughing softly. Derek stepped closer, his hand brushing her arm, and then they kissed. Not a quick, hesitant kiss. A long, passionate one. The kind you only share with someone you've done it with before. In that instant, my heart stopped. My old life ended right there, in that office, watching the woman I loved with another man. And all I could do was sit in the dark, holding the dinner I made for her, realizing that everything I thought was real had been a lie. I sat in the car across the street, my dinner forgotten beside me, and tried to steady my hands. The office light on the 5th floor glowed like a cruel spotlight, pulling me toward a truth I didn't want to face. I raised my phone, zoomed in, and my fingers trembled so badly I thought I might drop it. My breath caught in my throat as the image sharpened, and suddenly there they were, no shadows this time, no blurred outlines. It was Chloe, my wife, and Derek, her boss. She was laughing, tilting her head back in a way I hadn't seen in years, her body leaning comfortably against his desk. He stood close, his hand brushing hers like they'd done it 100 times before. And then he leaned in. The kiss wasn't hesitant or stolen. It was long, deep, and full of a familiarity that hit me like a knife twisting inside my chest. Watching her in his arms, seeing her lips on someone else's, was worse than any pain I had ever imagined. It was as though my heart had been ripped open, leaving nothing but emptiness. My stomach churned so violently I thought I might throw up right there in the car. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, trying to keep myself from losing control. Every muscle in my body screamed to storm into that office, to throw open the door and demand answers, to shout and rage until there was nothing left. I could picture myself barging in, slamming the dinner bag on the desk, and watching their faces twist in shock. But another thought crept in, quieter and stronger than the urge to act. If I went in now, it would all turn into shouting, lies, and excuses. She would call it a misunderstanding. Derek would smooth talk his way out of it, and somehow I would be painted as paranoid. That's how betrayal works. It twists the truth until you start doubting your own eyes. I forced myself to sit still, my chest rising and falling in short, ragged breaths. I needed something undeniable, something no lie could erase. Proof. Solid, unshakable proof that what I was seeing wasn't just in my imagination. Slowly, I lifted my phone higher, framed the two of them in the screen, and pressed the shutter. The click was quiet, but to me, it sounded louder than thunder. The image froze on my phone, Chloe in another man's arms, her lips locked with his, a perfect snapshot of the moment my marriage died. My hands were steadier now, my breathing calmer. Strangely, I felt no rage, just a coldness settling over me like ice in my veins. I lowered the phone and looked up at that glowing office window one last time. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply knew. My world had shifted, and there was no going back. What I had just captured wasn't just a picture. It was the weapon I would need to end everything and make sure they could never deny what they had done. I sat in the dark for a long time after that night, not moving until the city lights blurred into the windshield. When I finally walked back into the house, everything looked the same, but the air felt wrong. I put the meal in the fridge and went straight to our bedroom. I didn't yell. I didn't ask questions. I let her come in with her tired smile and her practiced apologies while I kept my face calm. She noticed nothing out of the ordinary, and that was exactly what I needed. Over the next days, I became careful in ways I never had to be. I watched patterns instead of people. I learned when she left in the morning, who called her after hours, which apps she used. I didn't confront anyone. I collected small facts that would not be easy to explain away. I wrote down times and dates in a little notebook and marked them like a surgeon marking a chart. Each tiny thing fit into a map I was drawing in my head. I also used other people's words. I reached out to an old friend who knew the industry and asked casual questions about company rules, how those in power were held accountable, and what usually happened when whispers turned into complaints. I never said Chloe's name. The conversation was clinical. I wanted to know the mechanisms, how an office scandal usually unfolded, who investigators spoke to first, what kinds of proof mattered the most. That advice shaped the next moves I made. At night, while Chloe slept, I sorted through bills and emails, not for drama but for precision. I checked timestamps against the little timeline I had been building. Where things didn't line up, I took screenshots. Where messages used codes or sudden new words, I saved them. I made copies of anything that looked like a pattern. Repeated late-night contacts, strange billing entries, abrupt calendar changes. I kept everything in multiple places so nothing could vanish by accident. I learned to be invisible at home. I asked neutral questions that sounded like small, everyday concerns. Did your meeting change? Is your car in the shop? I never accused. I let her explain and watched the patterns in her answers. When she created a new excuse, I compared it to what I already knew and watched the inconsistency grow. Then I started nudging things into motion without showing my hand. I opened an anonymous email account and drafted messages that would raise eyebrows in the right place. I didn't send threats. I sent clear, factual notes that outlined where to look and why. I addressed them to people who could not ignore them. Someone in the company's compliance office, a third-party consultant, a journalist who specialized in workplace misconduct. The tone was spare and calm. Not a plea, not a trap, just a string of dates, names, and documents that begged to be checked. I also made sure legal options were visible to me. I spoke, in a roundabout way, with a lawyer friend and asked about the strongest forms of evidence and the best way to preserve it. Again, I kept the details minimal. I wanted guidance, not emotion. That lawyer's advice confirmed what I had suspected. Facts that lined up over time carry far more weight than heated confrontation in the moment. By the time the first knock on their door came, I had more than a single moment to show. I had a trail. It was quiet, methodical work. a slow tightening of threads until the whole pattern could no longer be denied. I hadn't wanted war. I wanted the truth to be undeniable. The rest followed from that. I began to act like nothing was wrong, but it was all an act with purpose. I smiled at breakfast, asked about her day, and praised her for the effort she put in at work. My questions were casual and small. Any big meetings today? Or do you need me to pick anything up? So she would not feel watched. I wanted her to feel safe, to keep moving in the same predictable ways while I quietly built my case. While I kept the house calm, I turned my attention outward. I used harmless excuses to reconnect with people who might know about her workplace. Old classmates, former colleagues, anyone who could point me toward how the company really ran. I didn't lead with accusations. Instead, I asked general things about leadership styles and how the office handled complaints. Those conversations gave me clues about who paid attention to ethics and who ignored problems. I traced a path through the company without ever saying her name. I also learned to use public tools well. LinkedIn profiles, press releases, and archived news articles became useful. I studied the boss's career, where he had worked before, which projects he led, and how his promotions came about. Patterns emerged, fast moves up the ladder, a charisma that often came with rumors. That history suggested where he was vulnerable and what kind of rules the higher-ups might care about. There were company handbooks and policy pages hidden in plain sight. I read shareholder letters and board meeting notes to understand what would matter to people with power. Some leaders publicly vowed to protect the firm's reputation. Others were sensitive to scandal because their names and money were tied to public trust. That meant if I could show a breach that risked legal trouble or bad press, it would get attention fast. Next, I found the right targets to approach. Not everyone inside would help. Some would cover for the boss or ignore problems to avoid trouble. I looked for people who had a record of following rules or who had been passed over and might want fairness restored. A compliance officer and a longtime board member stood out from the documents and articles I found. They were the types who answered uncomfortable questions and would not let paper excuses end the matter. I set up quiet, anonymous ways to share what I had. An email account that revealed nothing about me. A folder with dated files that showed a pattern rather than a single event. I was careful to preserve originals and make copies. If anyone tried to deny dates or messages, the files would prove hard facts. At home, my behavior never gave me away. I stayed helpful, flexible, and calm. I suggested small, harmless things that nudged her schedule, just enough to create gaps I could check later. I never forced a confrontation. Instead, I used subtle moves to keep the situation natural while I tightened the net I had been preparing. Everything I collected had a purpose, to show not one moment, but a sequence that mattered. I wanted the story to be clear to someone who had to act on it, someone with authority who could not ignore a pattern threatening the company. I wasn't trying to humiliate for the sake of pain. I wanted the truth to be seen where it would be judged fairly. By the time I was ready to move, I had a clean plan and the right people in sight. My steps were measured, and they followed the rules those people themselves had set. I did not rush. I let the work of finding the right audience become the most important part of everything I would do next. I knew the pieces were almost in place, but before I struck, I needed the ground beneath them to start shifting. I chose a method that would raise questions without pointing directly back to me. On a quiet evening, I sat down at my computer and went to a site where employees often left comments about their workplace. I wrote a short review, nothing dramatic, nothing that could be brushed aside as gossip. I hinted that a manager had been showing clear favoritism toward one of his staff members. I used dates and details that matched her late nights, so anyone curious could connect it to real events. It wasn't loud enough to be seen as slander, but strong enough to invite scrutiny. Once the seed was planted, I turned my attention back to the home front. I needed to see where her loyalty stood, and if she would admit even a fraction of the truth. One evening after dinner, I casually told her something that wasn't true. I said a friend had mentioned seeing her and Derek together looking too close. I phrased it like an insecure husband fishing for comfort, not an accuser holding proof. I wanted to see her reaction, not her confession. Her face changed instantly, but not in the way I hoped. Instead of concern, she went on the attack. She scoffed, shook her head, and asked if I had lost my mind. She told me I was imagining things, that maybe I was jealous of her success. She spun the conversation until I was the problem, not her. Every word out of her mouth was designed to make me doubt myself, to make me question whether I had really seen what I had seen. The more she spoke, the colder I became inside. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't show even a shadow of guilt. She leaned into her role, painting me as paranoid, even suggesting I should trust her more if I truly loved her. It wasn't just the lies, it was the ease with which she told them, as though she had rehearsed this very speech. I didn't argue. I sat quietly, nodding at the right times, letting her believe her performance had worked. Inside, however, something clicked into place. Any last trace of doubt I had was gone. The woman across from me wasn't interested in saving our marriage or easing my pain. She was interested in protecting her secret, no matter how much she had to twist reality. That night, while she slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling and understood the final truth. She wasn't going to stop. If she could lie that smoothly to my face when I gave her the chance to come clean, she would never choose honesty. She thought she was untouchable, that she had fooled me completely. And that belief was exactly what I needed her to have. The bait was set. The company had its first whisper of doubt, and Chloe believed she had silenced mine. Both of them were walking into the same trap, unaware that the ground was already starting to crumble beneath their feet. The day I had been preparing for finally arrived. I woke before sunrise, my mind clear and steady. On the table in front of me sat a folder I had spent weeks building. Inside was everything I needed, each page carefully chosen, organized in the order that would tell the full story without room for questions. The photo that started it all was printed in sharp detail. Alongside it, I placed a timeline I had created, linking dates with solid proof. Late-night calls, unexplained charges, receipts that matched hotel stays, and other records that lined up perfectly. At the end, I added a letter I had typed myself. It was written without anger, free from emotional words, only facts. Every detail was presented like a report someone in power could not ignore. When the package was ready, I slipped the pages into 2 large envelopes. Each was sealed tightly, addressed in bold letters, and marked strictly confidential. I knew exactly who they were for. Eleanor Vance, the director known for her strict adherence to rules, and the company's founder, a man whose reputation depended on discipline and order. These were not people who would dismiss evidence or look the other way. I was handing them something that struck at the very core of their policies, and once they saw it, silence would no longer be possible. I dressed simply, blending in like any other employee walking into the building that morning. The city streets were still quiet as I parked nearby and carried the envelopes inside. The receptionist greeted me politely, not suspecting the weight of what I held. I walked straight to the desk, handed over the packages with instructions for immediate delivery, and left without hesitation. My heart didn't race, and my hands didn't shake. Everything I had done until now was for this moment, and I was prepared to see it through. Once outside, the air felt different. I didn't linger or look back. I placed myself into the flow of the morning crowd, blending into people on their way to work, carrying coffee cups and briefcases. I had just set something in motion that none of them knew about, something that would change the lives of 2 people who thought their secrets were safe. As I drove away, a calm settled over me. It wasn't joy or relief, but a quiet certainty that the wheels were now turning in places I couldn't see. I had done my part. The rest was no longer in my control. The company's system would take over, and once professionals handled the information, it would not stop until answers were demanded. The hours that followed moved slowly, but I no longer felt restless. I went about my day as though it were any other. But underneath the surface, I carried the knowledge that the truth was spreading. I didn't need to push further. The machine had started, and soon enough, The storm I had unleashed would find its way to their doorstep. My phone buzzed around noon, and when I saw Chloe's name flashing on the screen, I knew the storm had reached her. The moment I answered, her voice was trembling, breaking apart with every word. She was almost screaming as she told me she'd been pulled into an urgent meeting with HR and Derek. She didn't understand what was happening, only that it was serious. "Mark, something terrible is happening," she cried, her tone frantic, the polished confidence she usually carried now gone. I let her desperation hang in the air for a second before I answered. Keeping my voice calm, I masked every ounce of truth with a tone of concern. "What could it be, honey? Maybe they're about to announce a big opportunity for you," I said gently, as though I actually believed it. Inside, I felt a cold satisfaction, but I didn't let a trace of it slip through. She clung to my words, desperate for reassurance, while I stayed measured. When I ended the call, I set the phone down and allowed myself a quiet smile, one that came from knowing she was finally standing on the edge of consequences she had built for herself. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. I pictured her sitting in that office, facing stern expressions, her confidence unraveling as questions were asked and evidence laid before her. She had always been good at twisting words, but this time, she couldn't rewrite facts. The thought of Derek sitting across from her, stripped of his usual authority, added another layer to my quiet satisfaction. The empire they had built in secret was crumbling under the weight of truth. When Chloe finally walked through the door that evening, her appearance said everything before she spoke a word. Her skin was pale, her eyes wide, and she moved like someone carrying a heavy burden. She didn't even bother with excuses or stories. The silence between us was enough. At last, she confessed in broken sentences. She had been suspended until further notice, her access revoked, her reputation in jeopardy. HR was investigating, and they had made it clear the matter would not be brushed aside. I listened without interrupting, nodding in places, keeping my face unreadable. I gave no comfort, offered no words to ease her fear. She was unraveling, and for once, it wasn't because of anything I had said. She told me Derek hadn't left unscathed either. He had been escorted out of the building, stripped of his position while the board reviewed the evidence. The man who once carried himself like he owned every room was now reduced to a disgraced figure, barred from the very halls where he had once thrived. As Chloe sat on the couch, staring blankly ahead, I realized the mask she had worn for so long had finally shattered. Her world was collapsing piece by piece, and all I had to do was watch in silence. The perfect image she had fought to protect was gone, leaving only fear in its place. The days that followed moved faster than I could have imagined. Once Derek was pulled from his office, people who had stayed silent for years suddenly found their courage. Whispers spread through the building, and soon HR had more than just my package to sift through. Employees began sharing stories of Derek's arrogance, the way he pushed boundaries, and even details of his involvement with other women at the company. What had started with Chloe was clearly not the first. With each testimony, the walls around him caved in, leaving little room for excuses. The company couldn't afford hesitation. Apex Dynamics had built its reputation on integrity and professionalism, and Derek's actions were the complete opposite of those values. To protect themselves from further damage, they moved quickly and decisively. Derek's dismissal was made official, termination for cause. The words carried weight, marking him as untouchable in the corporate world. A man who once thrived on control and power was now stripped of both, his reputation left in pieces. Chloe's fate wasn't much different. Though she tried to downplay her involvement, the facts were undeniable. She had crossed the same clear lines, and the company wasn't about to show favoritism. One meeting later, she too was released from her position. No lengthy explanation, no chance to negotiate, just a cold, clean break. Her career, something she had always valued above everything, was gone in an instant. News of their downfall didn't make headlines in the public eye, but within their professional circle, it spread quickly. Colleagues whispered, former friends distanced themselves, and the scandal became a cautionary tale. The respect they once commanded had vanished, replaced by quiet pity and whispered judgment. When Chloe came home after her final meeting, her anger had replaced the fear I'd seen before. She didn't cry this time. Instead, she erupted. Her voice shook the walls as she screamed. "Was it you? You ruined my career. You ruined us." She looked at me like I was the enemy, her face twisted with betrayal. I didn't match her rage. I didn't raise my voice or flinch under her accusations. I simply stood there, calm and steady, while she fell apart in front of me. Then I told her the only truth she needed to hear. "No, Chloe. You did that when you kissed your boss. I just took a picture." My words silenced her. For the first time, she seemed to grasp that what had happened wasn't something I created. It was something she chose. Every action had led her here, and I had only revealed it. The room went quiet after that. She stood frozen, her chest heaving, but there was nothing left for her to argue. For once, I didn't feel the need to say anything more. The wreckage spoke louder than I ever could. I waited until the dust had settled before making my move. Chloe was already drowning in shame and fear, but I wasn't about to let her believe that was punishment enough. Quietly, I had been working with my lawyer, making sure every document was ready. The day she thought she couldn't sink any lower was the day I handed her the envelope. Her eyes scanned the first page, and she froze. Divorce papers. The final nail in the coffin of the life she had destroyed. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. "Mark, you can't mean this," she whispered, her voice trembling. But I did. I meant every line, every detail. She wasn't just losing me. She was losing everything she had built her comfort on. The law was clear, and so was the evidence. Adultery wasn't just a word. It was a weapon, and I had the proof. The photo, the phone records, the termination letter from Apex Dynamics. All of it formed an unbreakable case. My lawyer had laid it out so that there was no room for negotiation. The house, the accounts, the assets, all tilted in my favor. Chloe would walk away with nothing but the weight of her own choices. Her composure cracked instantly. She dropped to her knees, clutching the papers like they were a death sentence. Tears streamed down her face as she begged. "Please, Mark, don't do this." It was a mistake. Derek pushed me into it. I didn't know how to stop. I listened, but her words meant nothing. Each excuse felt hollow. Each plea a desperate attempt to rewrite what had already happened. She wanted me to believe she had been tricked, but I couldn't forget the image of her smiling in that office, leaning into Derek's kiss like it was the most natural thing in the world. That wasn't manipulation. That was choice. I felt no rage, no sorrow, only clarity. The man who once would have fought to save her was gone. In his place stood someone who understood betrayal deeply, someone who knew exactly what it cost. She wanted forgiveness, but I had none left to give. "Chloe," I said quietly, "you ended us long before I signed those papers. You just didn't realize it." Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't waver. I let her cry, let her drown in the reality she had created. The silence between us was heavier than her words, more final than her tears. When I walked away, I didn't look back. The house was mine, my future was mine, and my heart was free of her lies. She was left standing in the ruins of everything she once held dear. For her, it was the end. For me, it was only the beginning. I wake to a quiet house that feels like someone else's. The clock ticks loud in rooms that used to hum with plans and small talk. I keep everything, keys, papers, the car, but they are only objects now. The paperwork is signed, the bank accounts are separated, and the property is in my name. On paper, I am whole. In the middle of the night, I lift my head and find only a hollow where trust used to be. Friends check in at first, then move on. Some send polite messages that try to balance sympathy with distance. People who used to drop by for dinner find reasons to be busy. The phone calls slow. I thought winning would bring comfort, but it only taught me how empty a victory can be when the cost is the person you were. People at Chloe's old job keep their distance too. The rumor chain that started with a few whispered conversations made its rounds. Derek's name follows him like a shadow. Recruiters who once called him back stop answering. Jobs that seemed within reach close without explanation. He sends short emails that go unanswered, and his pride is the last thing left to break. Chloe is back with her family, her days small and careful. She notices the judgment she meets in the grocery line, in the park, in the faces of people who used to nod hello. I move through the house doing practical things, changing accounts, canceling subscriptions, sorting the boxes that measure a life. I remove framed photos and place them in a tote. I donate some things and keep others. Everyday chores fill the hours so my mind will not replay old scenes. At night, I sit with a cup of coffee that never tastes the same, and I try to remember the man before all this, the one who trusted easily and laughed louder. Sometimes I open the folder I had kept. I do not stare at the pictures to fuel anger. I look only to remind myself that truth mattered and that I acted for reasons I understood. The memories of what I built and what fell apart come in small flashes. Recipes we loved, the way she used to hum while cooking, then vanish under the weight of what happened. Those small things sting because they are ordinary and lost. The outcome taught me something ugly and true. Getting what you want does not always heal a wound. When you take someone's life apart, even if they deserve it, a part of you changes. I sleep differently now. I speak less. There is a caution in me that never existed before. I protect myself with walls I do not intend to keep, but they are there all the same. If I could go back, I might choose another way. Quietly leaving, refusing to be destroyed by their choices, might have been enough. Some battles need a witness, not a war. For anyone listening, know this. Winning can cost more than you think. Sometimes the strongest step is to walk away and keep whatever of yourself you can. Now I build slowly on things that can grow into a life that is mine. It will not happen overnight, but it will. I will heal. Do you think I made the right choice by destroying Chloe and Derek's lives? Or should I have just walked away and started over? Tell me what you think in the comments. I really want to know. And if you enjoy my stories, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.